We're joined now by Nate Silver, who's got a book out called On the Edge, which I have finished and read and really enjoyed. I also liked his book. I think I'm correct in this, Nate. Your prior book was The Signal and the Noise, which was about trying to use probability analysis. I don't know if you remember this, but we have met in person out in Vegas. You love playing poker. I have recognized that I am not good enough at math in real time to be very good at poker. I just don't have that skill set like a lot of great poker players do. But what I love about your work is you try to use data and be rational in a world that has become wildly irrational, it feels like, every single day. So I want to start with this. You became somewhat well known, I would say, with your analysis and predictions of the 2012 election. But in the 12 years that you've been a public figure and to a large degree since that, do you think national discourse has gotten better or worse? And if you think it's gotten worse, which I think most people would say that it has, are we starting to get a little bit better now, or is the discourse continuing to get worse? How would you assess the broader picture of sort of the national character of debate in this country as we sit 2 months from an election?
Yeah, thank you, Clay. No, look, I think over the course of this, 16 years I've been covering politics, it got pretty consistently worse from 2008 when I started to 2020 in the kind of pandemic year where we had the racial reckoning and COVID, all this stuff, an election year. I think in the past 4 years, it might have gotten a little bit better. I think people have a little bit more of a sense of humor. I think it's interesting seeing Twitter go from being this liberal platform to more conservative, frankly, under Elon. You see more independent content creators on platforms like Substack, where I have my newsletter, Silver Bulletin, for example. So I feel a little bit more optimistic, I suppose. Not being in a huge pandemic is helpful, at least.
Okay. One of the big things that you write about in your book is being willing to re-examine your priors. That is, things that you believe, if there's data that suggests, hey, maybe I was wrong about this, going back and looking at it and being honest in the way that you analyze that data. I agree. I think that's super important. What percentage of Americans do you think actually do that in their day-to-day life?
Oh, gosh, 5% or 10%. About 90% of people are going to vote for one party or another every single time. And look, it's hard to admit error, right? It's hard for me to do that too. The discipline of having a model or a process is that you follow some type of discipline in how you look at the world. But yeah, if you just kind of ping pong back and forth based on the most recent conversation you had, then you won't be very well off. I mean, you can be driven crazy by Twitter and social media. When our forecast had Biden trailing Trump, people are like, oh, is Nate like a MAGA supporter now, right? People, I think, can't separate out that some of us are actually curious about trying to make forecasts or I have political preferences, probably that don't match your audience that much, Clay, but I'm trying to be at arm's length and trying to be as accurate as I can be.
Okay, so I've said this before, I voted Democrat in the past. I'm going to vote Trump in 2024. Buck and I have debated this and talked about it quite a lot. How many people do you think there are out there on a percentage basis that are open to go from voting Trump 16, Biden 20, and then going back to Trump in 24? In other words, how many people are they really competing for, particularly in the battleground states? If you were trying to assess what that number looks like, what are we basically spending $1 billion to try to persuade? How persuadable is that audience?
Yeah, look, it's maybe 10% of the electorate in 20% of the states, or 10% of the states that matter. So yeah, this $1 billion is being spent on 1% of the electorate. You've seen polarization increase a lot, although there is more split ticket voting. You see it in Congress, for example, people splitting between the Democrat for Congress and maybe a Trump vote. But yeah, look, in my life, there's more of a permission structure, to use a fancy term, to vote for Trump in some groups, Silicon Valley, for example. But we're talking about, 90+% of people have made their mind up already.
So when you look, we're talking to Nate Silver, who's got a great new book out called On the Edge. When you look at Elon Musk, RFK Jr., and Tulsi Gabbard, I would say that in many ways my political evolution mirrors what they've done. I was maybe a few years ahead of them, and COVID accelerated it. Do you think that those three, obviously very big name in Elon Musk, and given the fact that he owns Twitter, Tulsi Gabbard, RFK Jr., do they change anything in terms of your calculus? I was reading in Axios that one way to connect those three people, and I think it connects with sort of my political worldview, is that the First Amendment is sort of the thing that matters the most to me. And so I'm going to vote for whoever I think is going to have the most robust, open policy for discussion, whether I agree or disagree with them. I think that's where a lot of the Trump support now is coming in Silicon Valley. Does RFK Jr., does Elon Musk, and does Tulsi Gabbard, to your point, give any cover for people who might be willing to consider Trump that haven't done it before? What's their impact?
I mean, so RFK, we removed him from our model this weekend. So far, not much impact, but we're kind of taking a wait-and-see attitude. You might have Kamala Harris's convention bounce, diminished a bit by that. It was only 3-4% of the vote. But I think the broader thing here is, like, you know, it's now conservatism that's the anti-establishment party.
Yeah.
And in different flavors of it, right? Not just the Trumpian flavor, but you see in those other, you know, Elon Musk, for example, a guy that, you know, one of the greatest founders of our time. And yeah, look, I used to be, again, I'm not gonna vote for Trump. I'll vote for Harris probably, but yeah, I you know, the free speech stuff bothers me too.
Let me pause you there, because I'm
COVID
actually, I think you'd overlap with me on the free speech stuff. But so you said you're not going to vote for Trump, you're going to vote for Harris.
Yeah, I
What
wouldn't
is
have voted
Kamala
for Biden
Harris?
because I thought it was very irresponsible to nominate somebody who was that old and clearly not capable of being president for another 4 years.
You wouldn't have voted for Biden. Well, how would you have voted if Biden-Trump was going on?
Probably libertarian, or see which other funky third party candidates were on the ballot were in New York, where I don't really have a relevant vote, but yeah.
I get it. You live in New York, right? So I'm in Tennessee. It doesn't really matter who I vote for in terms of the presidential election, because my state's going to go for plus 20. What do you think Kamala Harris is going to do well? You thought Biden was too old. I think there's people out there who would say, yeah, I agree with that. Now you say, but you're willing to vote for Kamala. She's going to be 60 years old. She's, 22 years some odd younger than Biden. What attracts you to Kamala? What do you think she's going to do well, or what do you think she's done well in the past? Or is it just you're not willing to vote for Trump?
Yeah, to me, some of the January 6th stuff was pretty disqualifying. Look, I think she has shown some tendency to play for the center. Yeah, there's some degree of flip-flopping there for sure. But in her convention speech, she talked about how he wanted like a lethal military and how he wanted to kick China's butt and things like that. It was a very atypical speech for Democrats that spoke to the center. Usually I watch speeches like at arm's length. I'm like, this is not speaking to me. I'm not a partisan Democrat, whatever. But like, she showed some instincts there that I thought were a little different. And yeah, you're getting some flip-flopping for sure. But look, I mean, with the January 6th stuff, that's kind of just an issue for me. And Biden's age was also disqualifying. So now it's kind of process of elimination, I suppose.
Okay. I'm going to give you a pass on that because I don't see how anybody with a functional brain can vote for Kamala, and you clearly have a functional brain. But I want to dive into your modeling and the battleground states here. Again, talking to Nate Silver, who is smart despite the fact that he says he's going to vote for Kamala. All right, so you have an interesting read. I was reading it. North Carolina and Georgia, two southern states. They did not move in tandem all the time. They went in different directions in 2020. My thesis is Trump's going to win North Carolina and Georgia. I think that he is. That's what the betting markets would show right now. How connected are they in your analysis? Do you like Kamala's chances in North Carolina more than Georgia, vice versa? How likely are they to move together in your mind?
Yeah, look, we have Trump as a modest favorite, about 60-40 in both states. She's actually polling better in North Carolina, which might be a bit counterintuitive. But keep in mind that in 2008, Barack Obama won North Carolina and not Georgia. You have a very popular GOP governor in Georgia, although not one that Trump gets along with terribly well. They're not identical. North Carolina has a substantially larger white population, although they're both quite diverse. We had seen Biden's numbers, frankly, crater with younger voters of color, younger black voters, younger Hispanic voters. Harris has gotten about half of that back, so she's competitive in these states. But you actually have some degree of racial depolarization in the country, which, other things being equal, I think is probably a healthy thing.
Okay. So the other states that I think are most fascinating, clearly what I call the Big Ten states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. They all moved together in 2016. Trump won them all. Biden won them all in 2020. What are the chances that they move together in your mind in 2024? And how would you assess them state by state in terms of the odds that Trump would win? Because if I'm right, and if your analysis is right, if Trump wins North Carolina and he wins Georgia, the easiest way for Trump to win the election is to win Pennsylvania, and it's over. And it doesn't even matter what happens in Nevada, Arizona, Michigan, or Wisconsin. He would have the requisite electoral votes. So how would you assess those three states, chances they move together? Where does Trump have the best chance? Where does Kamala have the best chance?
Yeah, and they do tend to vote together, as Hillary Clinton learned the hard way in 2016. Of the three, Pennsylvania is the one where, look, Kamala Harris has been in a good period for the polls, but Pennsylvania has been still a toss-up, a photo finish. There's a chance she'll regret not picking Josh Shapiro. Tim Walz has been effective in some ways, but look, I'm a math guy, and I'm like, yeah, I want those electoral votes if I were her, probably. There are different factors in each state. You see, in Michigan, for example, has a larger Palestinian Arab American population. I think Democrats are fortunate that the Gaza issue seems to have been diffused quite a bit. Wisconsin's more rural than the other two. Pennsylvania is kind of northeastern instead of midwestern. So there are subtle little differences, but 90% of the time they'll vote as a block, basically.
And which one do you like Trump's chances in the best of those three based on your modeling?
I think Pennsylvania. We've just seen that consistently poll as a toss-up. Harris +1, Trump +1, whereas Harris has been ahead recently in most polls of Michigan, Wisconsin.
If you had to pick one state that you could know the exact results for and forecast based on that to 2024, would it be Pennsylvania? Is that the one that you would want to have the data for?
Yeah, look, if all you tell me is Harris won Pennsylvania or Trump won Pennsylvania, I could, predict with 90-some% accuracy who's going to the Electoral College. It's a lot of electoral votes. It's a very demographically representative state. You got rural areas and a big city and suburbs, et cetera, decent-sized black population. So that's the biggest circle on the map.
Okay, you have it almost dead even, I think, right now, 50-50 in your forecast. Trump was ahead. Kamala's got a small lead right now. Is it fair to say that based on what we've seen from the polls so far, and my suspicion is that they're waiting to give us a lot of polls after Labor Day, and so we're going to get an inflection of new data then. But is it fair to say that we haven't seen any kind of real substantial Kamala Harris convention bounce as would typically occur historic? Or are the convention bounces more of something that isn't as much of a function anymore because so many people have already made up their mind?
Yeah, between the 24/7 news cycle and partisanship, they're less profound than they used to be. Polls are showing, we're showing about a 1.5 or 2 point bounce so far. You're right, by the way, Clay, that the timing's weird. We have Labor Day coming up. We had RFK. I'm sure some people tossed out their polls because they tested RFK. He won't officially be a candidate in at least some states. Look, if you had an election today, then Harris would be the favorite. Not a big favorite. We have all seen elections where the polls are off by quite a bit. But our model thinks that when you get to November, it'll tighten back up again. Look, I think Trump has not been on his A game recently, but you have a debate. You have other things to shake up and learn from. It's a bit like if you have the backup quarterback come in, he's like a scrambler and not like a downfield passer, and you need some adjustment period. But look, we know that American elections are very close. We know also that if the popular vote is a tie, then probably Republicans win. So they have that's a big ace in the hole if we're talking about strategy down the road.
All right, last question for you. I'd encourage you to check out the book. I read it. I really enjoyed it. On the Edge, Signal and the Noise, also a really good read if you're looking for something and you're a data probabilistic guy. Who is more rational, sports fans or political junkies? Who is a more rational group?
Sports fans by far, right? You kind of see a field goal like doink off the crossbar or a sharply hit baseball that gets caught by the shortstop. There's not this grievance. There was some. I'm kind of a New York Knicks fan now, so you see some grievance among Knicks fans. But I think sports fans tend to have a sense of humor that is often lacking in the political sphere.
Also, sports fans are constantly willing to re-examine their priors when it comes to a coach, when it comes to a player. Sports fans innately embrace data, right? If you got Aaron Judge hitting 51 home runs in New York City, and you didn't think he was going to have a good year, the data comes out and you have to adjust. It seems to me that sports fans are, by the way, crazy, but more rational than political diehards.
Yeah, to be confronted with the reality check 162 times a year in Major League Baseball or 17 times a year in the NFL instead of once every 4 years, it just kind of makes you adjust to reality a lot more rapidly.
Nate, I appreciate the time. Again, the book, On the Edge, good luck with it. I appreciate you giving us the time. I think people will enjoy it, and I'd encourage Signal and the Noise as well.
Of course. Thank you, Clay.
I got lots of good things to say. You almost killed them all by saying you're voting for Kamala, by the way. But I appreciate the time.
Thanks, man.
Nate Silver, super smart guy. His forecast fun to watch and look at among many other outlets out there. I find that he is rational in a way that few people are very often rational. By the way, we'll take some of your calls, 800-282-2882. We're going to be joined by Jim Jordan to talk about this big Facebook story that much of the media is ignoring. That letter from Mark Zuckerberg was addressed directly to Congressman Jim Jordan of Ohio. We'll talk with him next, but I want to tell you, we've got a lot of hunters out there in this audience. If you're one of them, let me tell you about Bear Creek Arsenal. They've been in the business for more than 2 decades, manufacturing great products at an incredible value. Buck loves the company, has a ton of their firearms. You've heard him talk about the performance, quality, but also the price points. I'm going to be down in Miami in a few weeks. We're going to go out and try out many of their arsenal. And Bear Creek has eliminated the middleman. You get the benefit of those savings. You can save even more when you use my name, Clay, as the discount code at bearcreekarsenal.com. Again, we're going to spend the day out on the range. I can't wait to check all this stuff out and add it to my own personal arsenal. You can learn more about Bear Creek Arsenal at bearcreekarsenal.com. Remember, discount code Clay. That's bearcreekarsenal.com. My name, Clay.